In 1993, NASA helped successfully launch the world's first self-landing rocket. It flew for just under a minute and successfully landed itself upright. It would be the first of a dozen of these planned tests and would come 22 years before SpaceX and Blue Origin's first successful landings. But little is known about the program, its history, its conception and eventual demise. How could a program that captivated millions and forever changed the trajectory of human space exploration go down as nothing more than a forgotten footnote in the long and storied history of NASA? So what happened to the DC-X and the people who quietly lit the flames on innovation? It's easy to imagine the DC-X being conceived somewhere in the long halls of NASA by a couple of engineers, but in fact, its roots can be traced back further than that, to a time of turmoil. In the 1980s, the Reagan administration created the Strategic Defense Initiative in response to the growing tensions of the Cold War. It was a program tasked to develop a missile defense system. One of the key elements of the SDI was the concept of the space-based defense system, a space force before there was a space force. They wanted to develop spacecraft that could intercept and destroy incoming ballistic missiles. To develop this technology, the SDI needed to be reusable, be able to launch quickly, and have a fast turnaround time. Meanwhile, simultaneously, a small group of like-minded individuals had gathered and were already toying around with similar ideas. Maxwell Hunter, an aerospace engineer and MIT graduate, had been thinking about reducing the cost of rockets for several decades. He wanted to build a single stage-to-orbit craft, which he called the SSX for Spaceship Experimental. It would have autonomous operations and would operate like an aircraft instead of a rocket. And General Daniel Graham, a former head of the Defense Intelligence Agency and advisor to Ronald Reagan presidential campaign, still had many friends within the White House. He founded Project High Frontier in order to develop a concrete plan for an anti-ballistic missile defense. The Conservative Heritage Foundation published the group's report, High Frontier, a New National Strategy, in March 1982. In it, he called for a constellation of space-based satellites loaded with small interceptor missiles as a forward-based defense. While Graham and Hunter had different ideas about what a space-based defense should look like, they agreed on the need for one. They also realized that building a space-based defense system would require an enormous number of launches and would come at an unprecedented cost. To overcome this challenge, Max Hunter shared his vision of a reusable spaceship that could reach orbit cheaply. They met at a meeting of the Advisory Council on National Space Policy, where Graham expressed his support for Hunter's vision. At the invitation of the council's head, Jerry Pournelle, a famous science fiction writer for Byte Computer magazine, who also had a strong background in aerospace and academics. He served as Associate Director of Operations Research at North American Rockwell Space Division and held the position of President at the Pepperdine Research Institute, where he worked on technology development and strategy studies for the Air Force. Pournelle had created the Citizens Advisory Council to originally help the Reagan transition team, but kept it around to provide ongoing recommendations to the Reagan administration. The council members there were the who's who of the 1980s, including everyone from science fiction writers to retired military brass, to astronauts like Buzz Aldrin. This council would be the starting point of an important innovation that would rewrite the story of space exploration. After George H. Bush and J. Danforth Quayle were elected in 1988, Quayle became head of the National Space Council. To influence space policy, a meeting was held by the Citizens Advisory Council in December 1988 to decide which launch vehicle the council should endorse. Although accounts of what transpired during the meeting vary depending on who you ask, all agreed that Hunter's vision of a rocket-powered single stage to orbit would be best. Graham then arranged a meeting with the then Vice President Dan Quayle, in which they convinced Quayle to greenlight their program, promising him an X vehicle that would be faster, cheaper, smaller. After being awarded a $59 million contract for its development, construction of the DC-X began in 1991 at McDonnell Douglas, now Boeing's Huntington Beach facility. It was phase 2 of a 3-phase plan to bring the vehicle into production. The aeroshell was custom constructed by Scaled Composites, but the majority of the spacecraft was built from commercial off-the-shelf parts. Unlike other rocket programs, the primary objective of the Clipper Graham was not to develop new technology, but to focus on operational aspects. They utilized mostly pre-existing hardware, salvaged from other aircrafts, to construct the rocket. They even used materials such as welding rods and hinges purchased from nearby hardware stores. The first flight took place on August 18, 1993. It was attended by a large crowd of onlookers, including members of the press, government officials, and aerospace industry representatives. The DC-X rose to a height of about 130 feet, lasted 60 seconds, and landed upright. It was a short flight, but it was considered a success. Following the launch, a post-flight report concluded that the vehicle had performed exceptionally well, and that all systems had functioned as expected. The successful launch of the DC-X was seen as a major milestone in the development of reusable rocket technology, and it drew widespread attention from the media and the public. It would go on to make several more flights, even showcasing maneuvering abilities mid-flight. 7 flights in total were made between 1993 and 1995, and despite its promising performances, the DC-X program would ultimately be cancelled in 1995. The end of the Cold War meant that the focus of US defense spending shifted away from missile defense and towards other priorities. Additional funding for the program was slashed by Congress as the overall defense budget was reduced in the wake of the Soviet Union's collapse. However, this would not be the end of the DC-X. In 1995, NASA, who had been involved in an unofficial capacity and as advisors from the beginning, agreed to take over the program and applied a series of major upgrades to the vehicle. They replaced the original oxygen tank with a lightweight aluminium-lithium alloy tank from Russia and the hydrogen tank with a graphite epoxy composite design. The control system was also improved. The upgraded vehicle was renamed the DC-XA for Clipper Advanced. The first flight of the DC-XA test vehicle was made on May 18, 1996 and resulted in a minor fire, with the deliberate slow landing resulted in overheating of the aeroshell. The damage was quickly repaired and the vehicle flew 2 more times on June 7th and 8th, with a turnaround of just 26 hours. Though it was a minor failure, it also demonstrated the ability for quick repair and turnaround periods. On the second of these flights, the vehicle set its altitude and duration records, flying for 10,300 feet and 142 seconds. And on its third flight, it demonstrated the ability to execute a planned rotation maneuver, transitioning from nose-first forward flight to controlled backward flight. This maneuver showed that a single stage-to-orbit vehicle could efficiently return from orbit using aerodynamic braking in a forward attitude and then rotate to a base-first powered landing at a spaceport. The DC-XA program was progressing well until the afternoon of July 31, 1996, in which the DC-XA would fly its last mission. Although the launch and flight portions of this mission went off flawlessly, only 3 of the 4 landing struts extended after slowing to a perfect touchdown. The vehicle slowly fell sideways on the landing pad, cracking the main liquid oxygen tank, causing a massive explosion, rendering the craft unrepairable. In a post-accident report, NASA's Brand Commission would blame the accident on overworked field crew workers who had been operating under on-again, off-again funding and constant threats of cancellation. Additionally, there was infighting going on behind closed doors in NASA over whether they should spend the money and time to rebuild the DC-XA or continue working on their own similar project that they had been working on with Lockheed Martin called the Venture Star. In the end, they decided it would be better to scrap the DC-XA so that they could focus on their project with Lockheed. The Venture Star, by the way, was never built either. While many who worked on the DC-X went on to work on various other projects with NASA, a handful would decades later be hired by Blue Origin to help design Jeff Bezos' New Shepard, which in part was inspired by the DC-X. Others also suggested that the vehicle could find a potential revival in humans' future on the Moon and Mars as a means to ferry crew in and out of the lunar and Martian orbit. It's hard to say how much space exploration would have been different had NASA stuck with the DC-X program. Only $60 million had been spent on it to that point, in comparison to the Space Shuttle program, which cost around $49 billion to develop and launch. Maybe we would have already gone back to the moon several times over and would already have a base there. One thing though that is undeniable, the invention of the DC-X represented a paradigm shift in the intriguing endeavor of space exploration. While the manufacturing of the DC-X may have been way ahead of its time, there is no doubt that it paved the way for the Elons and Bezoses of this world and inspired the minds of countless men, women and children. Since its final flight, the project has attracted little attention and little remains of the iconic spacecraft. On August 17, 2013, the New Mexico Space History Museum showed off the rocket parts it had gathered to attendees of the DC-X 20th anniversary celebrations, many of whom are veterans of the project. Let me know what you think about the DC-X in the comments below. I'm the Curious Panda. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and check out my other videos. Stay safe, stay kind, and as always, stay curious. Bye.